Here.
Trustee Burson?
Here.
Trustee McKelvey?
Present.
Trustee Millet?
Present.
Trustee Muncy is absent. Trustee Williams?
Here.
President Wodnicki is absent. And can I have a motion for Trustee Millet to be President Pro Tem?
I so move.
Second.
Trustee McKelvey?
Aye.
Trustee Burson?
Aye.
Trustee Boatner?
Aye.
Trustee Millet?
Aye.
Trustee Williams?
Aye. Thank you, everybody. Would you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Trustee-elect Benetti, would you like to lead us, please? Thank you. Please be seated. All right. As Mayor Pro Tem, or President Pro Tem, I get to do something that doesn't get done all the time. I get to swear in a new police officer. So Sebastian Adamczyk, would you please come forward? Ready? Raise your right hand. Say I, state your name, and repeat after me.
I, Sebastian Adamczyk,
Do solemnly swear or affirm,
do solemnly swear and affirm
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and the ordinances of the Village
and the ordinance of the Village
of Campton Hills,
Campton Hills,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of the office
the duties of the office
of police officer
of police officer
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Sign your life away. Oh, you signed it already. Well, pretend you're signing it again, just for ceremony's sake. He's going to sign it again for the camera. There we go. Oh, well done. There you go. All right. Any photos or anything, Chief?
Yeah, I do.
Comments?
So typically, so it's sort of unique for Hampton Hills, it sort of switches gears a little bit. Like a problem a lot of the times is we have a lot of great lateral officers that come to the department. And it's sort of like a vicious cycle that sort of keeps getting us a little bit. We need to attract highly qualified, good recruits that are not only going to start with the agency, but hopefully have a long and great career. So Sebastian, I saved the last name for you because I have a hard time. He's going to start Celia Police Academy May 5th. So this is actually the first officer for the Campton Hills Police Department in a very long time, second in the history that is actually going to go through academy. Typically, we would do a badge pinning, but as you can see, he's got a very nice suit on there. So instead of what we're going to do here is we'll present the badge to you instead of sticking it here through your suit on you.
Chief.
Yes.
Yeah, if you guys want to come up and do some pictures, take 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
And they don't have to stay for this.
Yes, they don't have to stay for us. Do you want to run some pictures or not?
That is completely up to however
Come on.
you'd like to do it.
And then your family can take off and not stay for the rest of the agenda if they don't want to. You know, because the next thing is near and dear and exciting to me, building code and building documents, but I don't think the folks in the police department or the
Probably not.
newly sworn-in officer would necessarily,
I do
we
notice
won't be offended if they leave.
The average height of the force, just DC Blinko, you're now kind of getting up to, somebody's like, you can like eye to eye for change. All right, do we want to do that? Yeah, do that before, or should we do the, do you want to do Officer of the Month, or do you want Seth to go first? Do Officer of the Month. Yeah, keep on the police stuff. Okay, Officer of the Month?
All right, so we're going to recognize and congratulate Detective Oberth. He's named March Officer of the Month. We obviously started this year. This is the third time that an officer's been named. He's done many great things since being with the agency. He was actually nominated by a fellow officer for this award. He's been instrumental in improving the investigations unit along with Detective Roskins. They've both done a great job. He's also volunteered to become the Taser 10 instructor for our new tasers. And he also volunteered to be the Deputy Liquor Commissioner after Officer Hatt resigned. So he's taken on a lot of different responsibilities, which is appreciated. He's been helpful in updating practices and procedures. And another extra benefit to me in the department, he's actually a vehicle upfitter on the side. So he has actually been helping decommission and upfit our new patrol car, which saves us a bunch of time and money in the process. So he's done a bunch of great things. So I'd like to recognize him as March Officer of the Month. And the only reason Detective Oberth is not in uniform, they've been in Peoria for 2 days training. So he literally drove from Peoria straight to here, so he did his plaque, which I appreciate.
Well deserved. Just squads, right? You're not doing fire apparatus, are you? No, just want to make sure you're on, staying on the good side, that's all. Nice.
All right, everyone's free to go.
Yep. Thank you all, unless you're very intensely, budget and talking about building codes, stuff like that. Yes. All right, we're going to do this under public comment because it wasn't on the agenda. Seth, you want to come up and do a quick update for us, please?
Thanks. I thought everybody was here for me tonight, but I guess not. It's okay. All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Seth Summer. I work for Fire Safety Consultants, and we've been engaged by the village to provide a building code update for Campton Hills. Some of you may or may not be aware, the state of Illinois passed legislation in the past couple of years that mandated all municipalities update their codes. Currently, all municipalities are supposed to be on the 2018 version of the codes or newer. Campton Hills is on the 2012 version, so they're a couple of cycles behind. So what we're proposing to do is update Campton Hills to the 2024 codes, which will make you guys current for quite a few more years. You can't get more than 2 cycles behind, so this will carry you for a couple more code cycles until we decide to do this again. So just real quick to state what we're doing with the building codes and the reason that we're updating the building codes other than the state mandate is codes change over time. The reason that codes change every 3 years is because something bad happened somewhere, either to somebody or a structure. And so the building codes incorporate the latest building technologies and safety requirements, best practices, everything like that has happened. So Campton Hills will be on the latest and greatest version of those codes. So it provides a more modern code. We've also cleaned up Campton Hills amendments from the last time that the codes were adopted. These documents are usually never perfect, and there's some gaps and holes sometimes in when municipalities adopt codes, depending on who did them, who reviewed them, everything like that. So we took into account best practices and wrote local amendments that are specific to Campton Hills. One of the major ones is removing the requirement for single-family homes to be sprinklered, which is usually a hot topic. So Campton Hills will maintain that right now with what they have currently adopted, so no changes on that front. We've made the language more legally enforceable and consistent with Illinois regulations. And essentially, this isn't other than paying for our consulting fees, the adoption of the code is not going to cost the village anything additionally. It's going to reduce your legal exposure through clearer enforcement provisions. And your permit fees are still staying the same. That the way that we're adopting the code, this allows you to update your permit fee schedule without having to go through a formal process of adopting the new codes or anything like that. And some of the recommendations that we have, we're suggesting that we have these codes take effect October 1st as of right now. That can change depending on the will of the board. The reason that we're saying October 1st is because of the projects that have already been designed. They have already been designed to the codes that Campton Hills currently has adopted. So if you were to change at the beginning of the construction season, which is now upon us, it's going to cause folks to go back and pay architects and engineers to redesign the buildings that they have already paid money for. So it's not a good idea to change codes in the middle of construction season, which again is now upon us. So that's the reason for that. But if there's any reason to move that up quicker, we can consider that, but we don't recommend it. Some of the other things that we'd want to do to work with staff is put some information on your website to alert contractors and designers that are looking to submit projects within Campton Hills, make them aware of the code update that's coming later this year. And then there can be links to resources that give them links to the codes themselves, and then update information on what has changed in the code. And we can put some of that online as well. And then we're willing to work with the village to update any forms that they may have for permit applications or anything like that. So I gave a real quick overview of what we're doing and why we're doing it. Is this an opportunity for folks to ask questions if they
Yeah, I
want?
would think so. And the amendments, I think there's going to be a little bit more robust discussion about need for amendments.
Well, considering we're doing it under public comment, how about we hold or questions or stuff from trustees back to writing for some point, because we got the budget stuff tonight too.
Yeah.
So, and then we can pick it up, we could do it separately as discussion maybe after.
Yeah, we
works.
could do that, or
Okay.
the next agenda, just have it listed as the deal points or business points that trustees want to
Yeah.
vocalize, and then we can get that back to Seth offline. It doesn't have to be tonight.
Okay, agreeable?
Can we get a copy of whatever has already been done early before the next
Yeah.
agenda? Could we get that sent out?
Also, I don't understand why this issue wasn't on the agenda in the
Right.
first place. If it had been on the agenda in the first place, I think it would be much more clear to us how we should be handling it tonight. My understanding, it was on the agenda, then it was removed from the agenda for reasons we don't understand. I don't even understand why we as the board don't control our own agenda, but apparently we don't. And so, I have lots of questions, but since this topic wasn't even on our agenda for tonight, doesn't feel fair to you or to the public.
Let's call
to
this
get into it
the
deeply.
introduction of the
Yeah,
beginning of the
I-
process.
So maybe this is our, you know.
The heads up.
The beginning of putting it on the agenda for
Yeah.
the next time.
All right, very good, thanks, Seth.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Okay. We have a public hearing that we're going to open to discuss jurisdictional boundary agreement and joint planning agreement between the Village of Burlington and the Village of Campton Hills. As a public hearing, anyone wishing to speak, please, you want them to stand? Okay. Anybody that's wishing to speak on this topic, please raise your hand and be sworn in by counsel. All right, hearing none, or seeing none, I will open said public hearing and ask for a presentation and review of the proposed agreement. Who is giving that?
Need a motion.
I'm sorry. Motion to open the public hearing from
Second?
Williams, second by Burson. Any discussion on the motion? Simple motion? Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? All right, motion passed. We are going to open the public hearing. Presentation.
Sure. I can give a brief overview of the agreement. It's included in your packet. It was previously provided at a prior meeting and has been posted at Village Hall for some time now, certainly more than the required 15 days. There's publication in local newspaper to indicate that both the Village of Burlington and Campton Hills would be approving this agreement on either the 1st or the 15th of this month. As we indicated before, the agreement designates the jurisdictional area of both villages, and then the boundary line between both villages, roughly running along Plato Road, down Burlington, westward along Ellithorpe, and then south, that was on Rumpke Road. So this is essentially equally between both communities. The language of the agreement indicates that the areas on either side of the boundary line that are currently unincorporated, that the idea of the village, the intent of both villages is that these areas would remain in their current form. So either undeveloped farmland or in their current residential form. And it provides notification requirements for either community if there are particular zoning applications for properties that are near the boundary line, and it actually, would make the other municipality an interested party in the zoning applications. They could come, they could object, and it has various requirements for the Planning and Zoning Commission regarding those instances. So if anyone has any questions.
Well, we're hearing, so you're presenting, right?
Yep.
Okay, so this would be cross-examination, present evidence. We don't have any from the public to do that. So we could close the public part of the hearing and then have the discussion.
Absolutely.
All right, motion to close public hearing? By
Second.
Williams, second by Burson. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed,
Aye.
nay? Ayes have it. All right, discussion, comments, anybody? Trustee Burson?
Given the cards that we're dealt in the greater area here, and understanding that the municipality of Burlington probably didn't feel that they had quite the heft that Elgin did in some of these negotiations, seems to have given up the Route 47 corridor some time ago. And it appears to me that Burlington retained the intersections across Route 47, one of which is Plato Road. So that's why we have the opportunity to discuss this Plato Road boundary. And I'm happy about that, and I think that this general boundary line, and particularly as we move out northwest and between the two villages, makes sense. When we look specifically at Kendall and Plato and 47, we need to understand, I think, that Burlington gained the intersection in the deal with Elgin, also at Plank Road. So they lost the corridor. Elgin has both sides of 47, but Burlington has the intersections. And so what's available for us to get out of this seems to me to be the south side of that intersection at Plato and 47, along with this corridor that extends to Kendall. And apparently we're agreeing to the south side. We get the south side of the road. Burlington has the north side of the road. It would be great for all of us, and considering what we're trying to preserve here, if that could have extended further east. I remember Trustee Millette speaking with you about this about a year ago, and sort of imagining that if it could have gone to Muirhead, that would have been great. But Burlington agreement with Elgin doesn't extend that far. So if we're piggybacking on their agreement.
Yes, ma'am.
right? And this is what we can get out of that agreement. So I don't, it provides us what it does, and we're grateful for that. But we are limited by what Burlington has been able to negotiate previously, it seems to me.
Sure, if there's anything within the planning area between Burlington and Elgin, they certainly would not want to step into that area when discussing it with Campton Hills. Completely understandable.
And noting where geographically Burlington is, going much further east than Kendall is a stretch for them.
Right.
That's also why
Fair.
Elgin got them to stop there.
And especially, I mean, this negotiation started over 20 years ago, so.
Okay, good point. Anything else, anyone? None? Okay, then we do have an action item later on to vote on. But prior to that, I'll move on to consent item, or item number 6, the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Thank you, trustee Burson. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, thank you, trustee McKelvey. All right, no discussion on the consent agenda, so I would have a roll call, please, Madam Clerk.
Trustee Burson?
Aye.
Trustee McKelvey?
Aye.
Trustee Boatner?
Aye.
Trustee Millet?
Aye.
Trustee Williams?
And consent agenda passes 5-0. Thank you very kindly. All right, so our action item number 7 would be to approve resolution 2514 to enter into jurisdictional boundary agreement and joint planning agreement between the Village of Burlington and the Village of Campton Hills. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
From trustee Burson, do I have a
Second.
second? Second from trustee Boatner. Discussion on the motion.
Just maybe note in the record, this is the first boundary agreement in the village's history.
I think that's a fair statement, yes. All right, Madam Clerk, when you are ready, please.
Trustee Burson?
Aye.
Trustee Boatner?
Aye.
Trustee McKelvey?
Aye.
Trustee Millet?
Aye.
Trustee Williams?
Aye.
Excellent, thank you all. That also passes 5-0. All right, item 8, to discuss the beginning, I guess this would be similar to the last one. This is the beginning of our discussion of the budget. However, we do have something to look at, which we only just got, though. So, Tim, you want to come up and do something on this, or how are we going to run the intro on it?
Yeah, I think we were going to address it either as the Public Works, Police Department, then Finance Department. He can go through that.
Okay. Let's do a quick
Hello,
walk.
everybody. Can you hear me
We're not
okay?
doing the other reports. The other-
Gotcha.
So I've given you kind of two sets of items here. One is the final audit report from the auditors. That's a bound book that you've received. I will just point out page number 4, the most important thing on this independent auditor's report, at least in my opinion, is the second paragraph under opinions. And that sentence reads, "In our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects." That is essentially what you're looking for as trustees from your auditors, that they are independent and that the financial statements are accurate and fairly presented. Moving on, in that same report is kind of a preface to our budget, and that is page 27 and 28 of the report. And this is essentially the statement of revenues and expenditures and the changes in fund balances. So it's essentially a profit and loss statement for the village based on funds. Focusing on page 27, the column all the way to the right totals, we brought in $4.8 million in revenue across all funds, and we spent $6 million, which is a deficit of $1.1 million. Now, some of you might think, oh my God, we spent over $1 million more than we were supposed to, but we anticipated that. If you look at the motor fuel tax, also on page 27, the first column, we spent much more than we brought in. And that's because in previous years, we did not spend the revenue that we brought in, and we didn't spend it until this fiscal year. But probably the most important number here, and it's a good basis point to start a budget discussion, is the very last number on page 27, and that's $5.99 million. That is basically the cash the village has on hand across all funds. What does that mean? In the 18 or 17 years that this village has been in existence, you've brought in about $6 million more than you've spent. That's pretty much it. So with that, I'll move on to some of the other items I presented.
Oh, and Tim,
ahead. You
the
got a question?
date that the Lauterbach and Amen is coming to the board is the first meeting in May, the 6th?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, they will be present May 6th, so the new board and the outgoing board will both be available that night to ask questions.
Do we get the super exciting person or the mildly exciting person?
Both, you're going to have a partner
Excellent.
and
Excellent.
a manager.
It is better than listening to lawyer counsel. Yes, it is. Thank you.
So, moving on to the draft budget. You've seen this format many times before. I'm going to direct your attention to the very last page, page 9 of 9. The fiscal year '26 budget column, all the way to the right. And that is line 283, which I've marked, and that is $457,000. That is our deficit for this budget. And what that means is we're going to bring in $457,000 less in revenue than we plan on expending. Now, there's a lot of caveats to that. One, I made a mistake on the budget. The very first page, line 27, Trustee McKelvey, you may appreciate this. When I first got here, Trustee McKelvey was always asking why revenue had to be negative. If you look at line 27, video gaming is a positive number. That should be negative. I entered it incorrectly. My apologies, but I have to work off this document because this is the document we presented to the public. So that will benefit our variance by, what would that be, about $52,000. So that's good. Some other items on here that I think are worth noting. We have $125,000 set aside for a contingency. We did that last year and we hardly touched it, but I think that is a prudent budget practice. We've also had some discussion with some other trustees about the amount of money set aside for legal. Further along in the packet, actually, I think it's the very last page, I have the 3-year legal expenditures, actuals. Some years are much higher than others, and that obviously is because some years we have situations presenting the village that we don't in other years. We did reach out to the village attorney, and his proposal for the budget was much lower than what we budgeted. He doesn't think our budget, our legal costs for the next fiscal year will be that high. Village Administrator Rooney and I, not that we disagreed with him, but I think we're just a little bit more cautious, and we put in, I believe it is $175,000 for legal expenses. Now, there's always the question of where that belongs. Does it belong with the village? Does it belong with the general fund? Does it belong with the building and and zoning? That's up for debate, but the bottom line is we are going to have to spend this cash as it's incurred. I'm sorry, Trustee McKelvey, did you have a question?
Thanks. Sorry. Yeah, you said 175,000. What page are you pulling that from? Is that all in? Is that legal from the administrative section? et cetera, et
Again,
cetera?
that's another mistake, but it is in your budget, which is the village board. It is also, that's 75,000.
Okay.
It is with the general administration, that's another 75,000.
Okay.
We were going to put $25,000 in for building and zoning, but I actually put in like 42,000. That was my mistake. So if we lower that to 25,000, that variance would be even lower.
Okay.
Because historically, we do spend money, on the general administrative, the personnel costs that we've had in the past for legal.
Yeah,
And
just,
then- And then there's the building department and specific, any contract issues generically too.
yeah, and I don't disagree with that, that we, the last couple of years, we've spent what I will call exceptions. In other words, those are, hopefully, we don't have any more of those exceptions on a go-forward basis. But, I also had, and I appreciate it, he pulled just prior years, because I wanted to see what general legal services we spent, just to go back, because my recollection was always 50,000, And I'll just read off from 2016, 63,000, and I'll go to 17. Okay, so 76,000, then 48,000, 69,000, 63,000, 51,000. And then all of a sudden, now we start blossoming into these larger numbers. So when I hear you budget 75,000, I challenge us by saying, why? So, no, but I'm just talking, correct, I'm talking about the board, okay? So I'm because you can't look at the total. I want to see how that total, how we got to that total. So from a legislative standpoint, I think you said 75,000 is what we're budgeting, is that correct?
Correct, for legislative, correct.
Correct, so I'm saying, to start with, there's a sand castle in there. It's too much sand. We got to whittle that down. Now, we can debate that later, or whenever you want to debate it. Then when it comes to those exceptions, Administrator Rooney, that you mentioned, I hear you. We have had those the last few years. But there again, what do we budget for that? So for those, I'll call it litigation, call it whatever you want. Litigation, what's that budget number?
Okay. So that is not broken down.
Okay.
And Trustee Boatner and I have discussed a more detailed plan of kind of bifurcating the total legal expenses, the baseline, which would be how many meetings we have scheduled for the year, average number of years multiplied by the hourly rate, and that would be the baseline. And then the other side of the bifurcation would be potential litigation, 3 or 4 lawsuits, issues with zoning, things of that nature. So from that bifurcation, you get your total, but then you have to decide which department do you want it in. I mean, I really don't think it matters much one way or the other, just as long as we all agree on the methodology of why we might put it in the general administrative line, or we might put it in your elected official line. I'm not sure, like, we used to put it in the police line. I mean, the police really can't control their legal budget, or could they? I mean, so that's kind of more a
Right.
philosophical
Again, those are
argument.
exceptions, but you had made a comment, and let me quickly follow up on it. You said that the attorney asked for a lower number. Attorney, what was the number that you suggested that we go for, and what was the number that we went with?
We had a general discussion about what was going to be proposed, but I don't recall giving an actual, like a figure.
Oh, okay, well then
Yeah.
I thought you had said you were given a number.
He was, and I don't recall what it was, but it was definitely lower than 175,000.
Okay.
Trustee Person?
I appreciate all your hard work, and I do not, I mean, I completely spot you an occasional mistake in this huge raft of numbers that
Sure.
we're looking at here. This happens, and so that concerns me not at all. And we understand what it is, and we can, sort of, understand offsets for that. Obviously, it'd be better if we could catch these things before the hearing than afterwards.
Sure.
But still, for our decision-making purposes, it's completely okay. I share concern that I think is felt across the board over firstly, the amount of legal expenses, and then also how they're allocated. I agree with you that the allocation is less important than the number, but the allocation is not unimportant. And the fact is that investigations and litigation subsequent to those investigations, which are HR matters of some sort, are clearly not board expenses. We, the board, authorize investigations where they seem to be warranted. And we have authorized litigation, and we have authorized settlements. But those are things that flow out of issues that are really HR matters. And so I mentioned this earlier, and someone said, well, we don't have an HR department. Well, that doesn't really matter. An HR line item is appropriate with or without an actual HR person, right? And because it helps us understand whether some of this money that we're spending is related, well, we see that it is, but it puts it in sharper relief that some of this money has to do with how we as a village are managing these situations. It's not just that bad things happen to good people. Of course they do. But what do we do when those things happen? And I think that our significant ramp up in these expenses reflects in part our unwillingness to see and accept what is happening and deal with it earlier on. I think it has to do with how some of these situations are managed long before they ever get to this point. And I hope that we've learned our lesson, at least to some extent, and we will see much less of this type of litigation and associated legal expenses going forward. That said, I don't think the board owns these expenses, the majority of them that are being attributed to us. I think it makes it look as if the board is busy spending hundreds of thousands of dollars of money on lawyers when we are, in fact, merely authorizing necessary expenses related to situations that we are confronted with. So I would encourage you to recategorize some of that. I think it will communicate better both to us and to the public what is actually happening. Other than that, I think that we also have to recognize that circumstances have changed relative to several years ago, and that unfortunately, we are obliged to engage our attorneys and ask them to weigh in on a much broader range of matters than we once did. So we would love to not have to call you, but it appears that there are a variety of things where that's necessary. But we as a board don't have transparency on how much of that is happening on the administrative side of things. We have all these things that are lumped in as board legal expenses, but we're not the ones calling. No member of the board calls and asks our lawyers to do anything, right? And so I think it would be useful for us to understand how these legal expenses are initiated, because I can't see it clearly.
I can suggest the next, for the public hearing, we'll spell it out. The baseline to have an attorney available for the base level of meetings.
Okay.
That cost, I can work with Carmen very granular to get a number for that.
Okay.
And then have another number that is not legislative, it's more general legal expense for our liability.
To what Trustee Burson was talking about,
Yes.
that might be
And then a
more
separate
HR
line
or,
for the building zoning number. So we'll
There's
have
one there
three-
too,
We'll
yeah.
have three places that we will disperse the,
which is
roughly
sometimes
175.
reimbursable depending on if it's a petition or something like that.
Yeah.
Trustee Boatner?
We got this afternoon, so my numbers aren't super accurate, but I was looking at legal fees, and just going off of the way Kleinthorpe bills. They give pretty typical line items on all of their bills. They have their general legal, they have zoning, they have FOIA, occasionally there's police legal matters. And went back, looked at some agendas at the building, roughly 3,500, 1,550, made some averages, comes up to about $84,000 a year for all of that. So like half, roughly, of what we're budgeting, because I padded everything. I didn't have a ton of time. But it's about half of what we're budgeting. So what I would suggest is we get our budget like accurate on what we're actually going to spend. And if we feel like there is a potential that we need that, put it in the contingency, you know? I mean, and let's protect that contingency fund all year.
We can definitely zero those down a little closer and then either have a separate litigation contingency of 100,000.
I mean, unless there's something we don't know, is there a reason that it has grown to that size for the budget? Is there something I'm unaware of besides looking at just past expenses?
Well,
Why is it so
I
large?
think if we venture down that road, we're gonna get into some actual litigation, and that probably is best discussed in the back room.
Okay,
But I can fine tune a estimated number. Right now, you are all aware there's nothing pending.
correct.
I don't see clarity in the future, but I didn't see this last one arise until it arose, so. Or I would have put the 100 grand into last year's budget, but it didn't occur till after we approved the budget a month later.
I still feel like it would be
We
prudent to
can
have
do
it
is-
broken out as a
We can break
contingent
it,
so that
break
we
it out
look
to
at it
closer to
differently.
the costs, and then just have a litigation contingency
Okay.
for legal.
Is that head nods on that one?
I think we're getting closer.
Okay,
Can I
and
have one more question?
before I forget my thought, if I may?
Yeah.
The clerk would be administrative also, because you mentioned FOIA. So anything we think is related overall to FOIA should be lumped in. So if we're talking about meeting coverage, us, planning, zoning, and then FOIA, I think those are, we usually don't have you at any other subcommittee meetings. So that would be a good basis to start with what would be in, and we're, for clarity, for further clarity, we're talking about line 76. Got that, Tim? Okay, you, back to you, Nick.
And that's where Nick's rough 75 to 85,000 would fit in that line, and then we could do the contingency for litigation.
Potentially, that would be smaller because we have it in legislative, and then we also have it in general administrative. So, you know, the general legal, I think, you know, we'll figure out how to break it up, but I don't think either of those would be 84 on their own. There's also some level of police legal, too. It's not much, but my second question, Treasurer, was if you could just help us understand, I know with the police services, the overall budget went up $600,000 from 25 to 26, and I understand that a lot of the hash marks underneath, you know, salaries, a lot of that is all consolidated up into regular salaries. And that's all fine, but still, when you go to the final line, it's still, the overall budget goes up from 1.7 to almost 2.3.
Sure.
And I went through if you could just help
Okay.
me understand that.
Well, the primary reason is going to be is the village has provided substantial increases to the police force because we recognize that the labor market for policemen is very tight, and we historically have not paid much. So we've made a conscious effort to keep up with the market as best we can. I had, in the previous meeting, I did provide a breakdown of how I came up with that number, that $1.3 million. I'll walk through it again. I did not give it to you again. The schedule, I can't forward it to you if you don't have it, but a quick breakdown is we anticipate 48 hours of officers on duty every day, 2 officers at a time, 365 days a week. That comes out to 17,520 hours. We bumped that by 7.5% for additional hours for things unknown, special events, for total operating hours of 18,834 hours. We also added some training hours per full-time officer of 100, holiday hours we have to account for, and MTO hours. So altogether, we took those full-time hours required, and I just multiplied it by the average full-time hourly rate. I think that's a reasonable strategy to come up with a good number. And that full-time hourly rate is $37.70. And then those hours that our full-time staff cannot absorb because we don't have enough full-time staff, I divided those hours between 50% are going to go to full-time at time and a half, and the other 50% are going to go to part-time officers. And that pretty much covers how I got to the entire budget for hourly rate. Salary budget. Now, for the record, and I stated this last time when we went over this, is the chief and the sergeant and the evidence technician do not cover operational hours. They are overhead.
So follow up then, so just to clarify additionally, is whatever the calculation was, are we saying that we are increasing staffing for the police department then by $500,000? So roughly that equates to. 'Cause
Well, again, primarily, the change year over year is going to be, we made a conscious effort to pay our police officers more. That's the primary reason. Another reason is going to be that we never had enough full-time officers. And so that when we needed people to cover the operational needs, we were paying them time and a half. So overtime was hurting us previously in other years. So the model that the chief has adopted as of last year is to get more full-time officers to bring down that, one, it'll bring down the overtime rate, and two, it'll give us a better quality of officers because they'll be full-time and committed to the village. But that's hard to quantify.
And
on a
part of
fiscal.
that too is that we've been under strength the previous years, so budgeted for, but actual costs have been lower because we had fewer, we might have been authorized 10, but had 8, or authorized 12, but had 10. So the authorized number and the actual boots on the ground have always been 1 or 2 less than the board has authorized because of length of time between departure and hiring and turnover. So Chief could speak to that a little more granularly, and we could get into that if you want to at the public hearing and break that down much deeper if you think that's beneficial to the public. We can certainly do that.
And
And
it's-
then the chief can speak to both the 12-hour shift again and what it should achieve, but what it didn't because of the lack of manpower and departure of people.
Yeah, and it's not to criticize or take away from what the police department needs. It's that I had understood it last year that we had budgeted for an adequate number of staff, but we hadn't hired to that level yet. That we had actually budgeted for the correct staffing that we wanted. We just, and then we were eating up a lot of overtime hours because we didn't have the full-time staff. So now.
Correct.
Yeah, so now are we increasing from, what's the number, 10 to now? No.
Chief, go.
The authorized strength from the board is 10 patrol officers. So that's not a chief of police, that's 10 patrol officers. Currently, we have 8 full-time patrol officers. So we are still down 2 full-time officers, which we've been trying to fill with the laterals currently. So, and it was sort of a mixed bag for obvious reasons, part of it that everyone is aware of. But if you look, even in the previous budget, being over budget, the overtime is actually down from what was budgeted, actually substantially. So we sort of did hit that goal on it. Obviously, there was other factors in it that raised costs. But we no longer can depend on part-time officers. We have 3 part-time officers in our department. We're trying to hire a 4th now. People don't want to do the job anymore, and they don't want to do it for a low rate. So we're taking away our part-time. We're trying to compensate that with full-time that we don't have. We're not at full staff for it. So I think in this budget, when you see the increase there, is it's taken into consideration, we're still short 2 full-time officers. It's a mixed bag there because we accomplished part of it by reducing what was budgeted in overtime substantially, but because of the other factors that took place, including having these 2 open spots, it's thrown it off. So yes, that was a very long story, but we
No,
are
that's
still
good.
short 2 full-time officers.
No, that's good.
And I think further to get to the board's final, getting to that 10, you just swore in the first person that's going to go to the academy. They won't be available on the street alone for 6 months.
October,
Yeah. And you got to,
graduate August, ride along for a couple.
So
Yeah,
that would be
and-
number 9 then?
and then
Okay.
number 10, there's 3 laterals that have to be interviewed to get the rank order from the police commission that does that. But I've witnessed and heard through the thin walls, down to 3 very qualified laterals that have been identified in background psych. So the chief is going to have those early in May. You'll be swearing somebody else in to get that 9th. And
Okay.
the 10th is on the payroll while they're in the academy, but at
Right.
that lower rate.
Okay. You good for now?
Can I just do a closing to make sure I
Sure. Make
completely?
sure you got it. Okay.
So 10 is still where we're trying to be with staffing?
That doesn't include the deputy chief and
No,
the
it's
chief.
patrol.
And the evidence
Correct.
tech.
Sure.
And that's authorized, that's not my number, obviously.
tough.
That is what the board authorized was the 10 patrol
Right.
previously.
But we're not increasing that. We're not going to 12 or 11
we're just finally
or
getting to
14.
it.
But the budget is going up $500,000. And I was just trying to wrap my brain around, did we miss it in previous years? That's all, because, I mean, that's about what that deficit is, you know? So I'm just looking at the big numbers that are on the budget, I'm trying to kind of figure out, like, oh, what is this, you know? And
You good for a
That's
minute?
it,
Okay.
yeah.
I would, before I go to you, trustee Person, I would say historically, since the inception, about half of our revenue has gone to police. That's traditionally been, and if we're looking at a revenue of 4 million, we're still, 4,000,002, we're still in that ballpark. You know, 4 million, or 2,000,001 would be half, or 2,000,002, so it's slightly above half. My comment before I get to you, we will have some overtime. We will have some part-time, so, I mean, I don't want to lump it all into line 136. Right, to your point, that's a good starting number, but I think we should want to distribute that, what your best guess is going to be. Okay, trustee Person?
I do not want to shortchange our police department ever. And I respect the complicated constraints that you're working within, Treasurer Phillips, in trying to characterize this budget with full-time officers working overtime and part-time officers and the mix not necessarily being what we had planned and all of those things. But $500,000 is a lot of money, and I have not heard anything tonight that explains that $500,000 to me. And that is understanding, which everyone want to dance around here, but understanding that for various reasons at various times in our budget are payments for people who are not actively serving, right? And so this is a burden that Chief Levand works under because it's in his budget, and yet he doesn't necessarily have an officer on the street. You know, so this can be for a variety of different reasons, and that's part of what we're seeing here. And all of these different things that we know of, we also know in this transition from part-time to full-time, we have full-time officers working overtime, right? Maybe more overtime than we had wanted. But still, I can't account for $500,000. I can't account for $250,000, actually. So for me, there is an enormous disconnect here. I don't think it's intentional. I don't think anyone's trying to pull their wool over our eyes. But I think that there is a big disconnect here, and I think Trustee Bodner, was pointing us in that direction. in asking some of these questions, and I think they're fair. And hopefully we can get a little bit more clarification. I suspect there are things that we don't know yet that perhaps we need to know that will help us understand better.
Yeah, let's get the clarification now. What is the $500,000 we're talking about?
That number was thrown around multiple times.
Well, that's not, what is the number?
So you're talking.
What are the two numbers you're comparing?
Are we talking our budget of 1709 versus the proposed budget of 2287? Is that the 500,000? Yeah. So you're looking, this current budget, line 176, this current budget, 1709, 243, versus the asked for of 2287, 629. That's your delta. That's the 500,000?
Well, it doesn't sound like $500,000, but the
Yeah, it is.
number.
Again, so the 2.2 million for the fiscal year '26 budget?
Yeah, it's 5.
And you're comparing it to what?
Yeah.
Your request for this 26 request is 2287,629.
Yeah, and what are you comparing that to?
This year's budget of 1709,243.
So, close.
That's 580,000. Well, that's the actual there too, but the budget, yeah, that's true. We're running the actual right now, so that's the other thing too. Our 10-month is 1.6.
Well, which number do you want to compare it to?
Well, we got to do budget to budget.
Well, you don't have to. You can do 24 actual, you can do the 10-month,
Well, what do you guys
actual
want?
year-to-date. I don't think it makes sense to do 24,
Budget to budget.
okay.
That's what the head nods are. We've also got, health insurance, we've also got a bump on there. That's something to talk about. Yep, you saw that. And then,
And salary
Retirement's
increases,
up.
which I don't
Yep.
think the board disagrees with.
Right, okay.
so we're just looking to kind of, a little bit up on dispatch, not much. We're just trying to look at everything that you guys are chasing that delta.
But I feel like if you say, well, there's 20% more here and 15% more there, all these different numbers, I accept all those, but
Sure.
it doesn't feel like it gets us
Okay.
to this delta.
Okay.
You got it, Tim?
So that's fine. I take exception to the fact there's $500,000 unexplained. That's a little concerning to me.
Don't treat it as unexplained. It's just.
Well,
that
for a
we-
pu-
we've got-
It's a
How do
public
we get
meeting,
from-
so.
How do we get from A to B?
I can tell you this, you run very lean in
True.
this, as you know that. That's why you have a $6 million surplus
Mm-hmm.
after 18 years. You have one full-time person on staff that's non-police.
Right.
And that is not me, I'm part-time.
No, it's Michelle.
I'm just putting together the budget that I'm statutorily required to put together. Could we go into more granular detail? We can. We do not have a full-time person to do that.
Right.
I can tell you my 20 years of budgeting, some of the most difficult things to budget are the things you're talking about.
Okay.
Legal is difficult to budget, especially when you're a small operation like Campton Hills. If you were a $2 billion global international company, some of the things that have happened to you are not going to be a big deal to that company.
Well,
For
they're to the
you,
right
it's
of the
gonna
decimal
com-
point.
The
For
right,
you, it's
yeah,
going to
the rounding
completely
error.
throw you out of whack.
Yeah.
But
And
no,
I
no,
But I
think-
can walk you through, now, I can't give you all the details now, but I can walk you
No, I'm
through from
asking you to do
budget
it
to
now.
budget. The two biggest things are going to be, I believe,
Salary,
your salary increase and your increase in pensions.
pension. Okay.
Okay, fair, thank you.
And I
Mark,
think the variance
I'll get you in a
is
minute, Tom.
the 1.7 to go into 2.87, it's a 377,000 increase in police from last year's budget. 24, if you look at that number to the proposed, it's about 300, it's just shy of 400,000 variance, not 500. What line is it? The 176, if you go to this other document,
Line number.
but if
Police
you look
services.
at the Tim's big picture costs on that other sheet, the police department's, Tim, the cost for the police from 2016 through 2024, if you look at that line, under police, it's gone up, starting at 1.1 million, finishing at 1.743.
Yes. For the record, the trustees do not have that schedule you're
No,
looking at.
but I
Okay.
know, but if you, the one you gave them though is the variance from 1.709, 243 to a projected $2,087,039. That's a $377,796 variance from,
Yeah, it's 580,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
580.
May I continue?
Yes, well, okay, yep, go.
So I have a brief point that I'm going to get to in a moment, but you touched on a different issue related to what we, the trustees, see or don't see. And I know that one of the reactions that I had when I saw the 3 pages that we received today is that they're PDFs. And I don't want PDFs, I want spreadsheets. I want things that I can work with, right? And I would really like to see the background behind those. In short, I feel that, and it's not a criticism of you particularly, but I think a person, a treasurer in this position should be showing their work. And we're having to ask too many questions that put you on the spot when it's maybe not even fair, when we could have looked at some of this data and answered some of the questions ourselves, but we're not getting the underlying data. We're not getting spreadsheets. We're not able to run our own analysis of any of these numbers. We're getting PDFs. It's presented to us as fait accompli, and that's all we get. So that leads me to this graph. This is a deeply concerning graph, right? So this graph shows that and you can see it in in the spreadsheets, it shows that our LGDF revenue has been increasing fairly anemically over the last couple of years, but more or less the same as our expenses, until just this last year where it like sharply goes up. I mean, it's 20% increase. And so I know, it's not a supposition, I know that we are going to be asked to consider taxes to increase the revenues below this expense line. And I have a number of problems with this. Firstly, when this says LGDF revenue, is this LGDF revenue alone? Does this include MFT? Does this include sales tax? I could go and try to correlate these numbers, but I really shouldn't need to.
No, you shouldn't, but.
Please let me continue. And although this is intergovernmental revenue versus general fund expenses, let's start there. It should not be LGDF revenue or any combination of intergovernmental revenue. And please, Dim, it's not your fault. I know you're the one on the other side there, but it's not your fault. This should be all revenues, because included in this ugly, steep red expense line, for example, is $400 and some thousand, I think it's $473,000 of building and zoning expense, correct? But building and zoning revenues are not included in the bar graph that sits below that line. And so we're in a situation where, without regard to whether the numbers are going against us or not, this graph is profoundly misleading. And this graph is designed to make it look like we need to increase revenues to somehow catch up with runaway expenses. And if we were to, in fact, put all of our revenues up against these expenses, we would see that our revenues are not as anemic as what this bar chart looks like. Mm-hmm. But even if they were, the question is not how can you increase revenues. The question is how can you reduce the slope of this crazy red line that is going up at over 20% from last year. Never in the history of our village have we seen an expense increase at that rate.
Could you, on the year, could you go back and include building revenues in there too? Because I think that's fair, because they're usually
I
Three to
can't.
400,000.
$600,000 last year, I believe.
Yeah.
So the point of the graph is to demonstrate that the primary revenue that this village receives is from the state.
Yeah.
And that is represented in the graph. MFT is not included in there.
No, it shouldn't be.
Okay, because MFT is strictly the MFT fund.
Yeah.
So what I'm showing here is that predominantly, these three LGDF revenue streams have been enough to support the general fund expenses, including building and zoning.
Okay.
It does not include any transfers in and out
Right.
to capital. And for the most part, for the last 9 years, it's been enough to sustain this. I'm less concerned about this red line going up, although I'm not saying it's not important, but we've already agreed that we want to pay our policemen, and the policemen are in a labor market that is, well, not favorable to us. But what the purpose of the graph to show is, what the purpose is, if you move on to the next page, I show you the roads that need to be repaired.
Mhm.
And this revenue is not going to cover these roads.
Nor should it.
So the
Yeah.
point is to show that the LGDF, for the most part, covers our general fund, but we can't use any of this LGDF revenue to pay for these roads.
Understood.
Okay, so I'm kind of bifurcating your budget, your
But-
capital.
Then,
But the next hearing, where we have the, started the public hearing on the 22nd, we can absolutely show the revenue generated from police fines and building
we should.
permits. But,
Or you remove the building function as an expense.
well,
'Cause
we'll
it's
show
meant
you
to
the,
be
we'll show you
neutral.
the net
That's fine.
of the building.
That
Cost
okay
of the
with?
building revenue, so you can see it on that chart. And the police fines and stuff is, you can see that on
It's
the
minor.
other chart where it fluctuates a little bit, but it stays pretty steady, because we never have intended to be a,
No.
police writing a lot of tickets to generate revenue at all.
Trustee McKelvey?
So, we can absolutely include that, but the supposition that trustee Burson's hitting on is still gonna be there, even if we put the,
I don't think the slope would
Net-
be as steep.
well, no, I think the revenue line will be closer to the red
Okay.
line if we include. But the other thing you gotta know on the building and zoning, we had Norton Lake getting 10,000 per unit.
Well, that's true, but
and that is gone.
that expense goes away too, though. We won't be using B&F as much, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Trustee McKelvey?
Yeah, Tim, I think the difficulty that you can see that the board is having is, I mean, you know, I saw this at 3:30 today, so haven't really had a chance to digest it all. And so we're, you know, right away, I brought up my favorite subject, legal, someone else brought up, the police budget, whatever, so we're jumping all around. So let me go back to square one, if I can, for 1 second. I'm going to assume, because in the past, this was always kind of hammered out with the Finance Committee. So my question is, was this hammered out with the Finance Committee? And I don't know the answer to that.
This document was reviewed with the Finance Committee. Hammered out, I guess, is kind of a,
Well-
Did we go line by line? No, they asked the same questions you are asking. The police pension, why is that, not the police pension, the police budget, why is that going up? Legal, what has that traditionally been? But then they spent a lot of time on this, is the roads.
Okay.
It's concerning. It's big. I mean, it is the elephant in the room, and nobody seems, we've been up here for what, 45 minutes talking about the budget, and you're not getting to the elephant in the room.
You can't.
I think it's
I think
important to look
they
at
can't.
legal.
Time out.
Go ahead. So anyways, that's it. I think this is the most important aspect for your budget.
Well, the elephant in the room may be the roads, but the problem is we have to approve and vote on a budget, and so what we're trying to do is understand the budget. The other thing is, in the past, they always tried to do 95% or cut 5% to save that little. I'll call it,
Right.
a little extra sand somewhere.
Right.
Is this budget proposal?
not.
It is not. This is 100% what you think is going to
Right,
happen.
Right.
So all the years past, we did 95, now we've just decided to do 100?
Right.
Okay. All
And
right.
they're gonna review again on the 17th, a second bite at the Finance Committee to discuss further with some details with Tim. And then they're gonna, somebody from the committee, hopefully John, will be here on the 22nd to kind of speak, yes.
Trustee Williams?
You know, I'll be honest with you, it's, the whole payroll thing with, you know, our major part of the payroll is police, right? The fact that these numbers are coming out of, and I'm not saying these are gospel, the 26 budget, but, you know, does it shock me the salaries are going up? Not at all, okay? The world around us. I mean, where are people gonna live? I mean, everything's gotten $1 million more. You can't expect police to work for nothing. You're not gonna get good police to work for nothing, I know that. So that's not even an option. We chose to have police back in 2007. That's a decision that was made a long time ago. You know, we became a village in 2007 for the purpose of this. So, you know, these are all things that, you know, you could never have a crystal ball and know what was coming. You know, we lived in a there was no inflation for how long? But these numbers that hit me on it, when I look at it, I see salaries, I see insurance, I see, okay, it's everything I sold my business for. Because I couldn't get revenues up, and every expense on this end, which is not really that controllable, to be really honest with you, it's not. People could say that they control it, but you really can't. Because all these things are going crazy. Every company is arguing about health insurance. How do we get it down? How do we charge the people? How do we charge our employees more when you really don't want to? Because you want to keep good people. That's a number. That's a problem. The legal is explainable. I think it can be figured out. I don't like the fact, I agree with you, Trustee Burson, on, you know, you got to include, you know, all the revenue, all the expenses. Yes, we're not going to be doing those permits over there. Is that going to reduce expenses? Yes, it is. So we can kind of play that game. But once again, I think we're chasing a number that, you know, our expenses are going up based on inflation, but the number state of Illinois is giving us is kind of crap. The number is not enough. It's going down. This whole idea of this village, in a way, and trust me, I'm the one that I would have came on this board and said I would have never passed anything of an increase. But I think the whole concept of the village to live off this amount that the Illinois was going to give us was a fool's dream. It was a fool's errand at best, because when I look at these numbers, I'm like, I don't see getting 300,000, 400,000, 500,000, 600,000. That's the numbers we need. I'm not saying that I'm not going to work on it. And I do believe also to the, you know, the streets need to be a separate look at. Yeah, are they bad? Yeah, they're not great. But this budget's kind of separate from that. So I would like to see these numbers broken out a little bit, like how did we jump from 710 to 336 in the next meeting, so I kind of know what I'm looking at. I can't tell you what's in there. I'd like to know. I can guess, like, was it health and dental insurance? Okay, well, that doesn't shock me, but it'd be nice. I'd like to know, did we shop the heck out of this? Is this something we do with the police? I don't know. So that would be the questions I would have. On the legal, same thing. I want to see, you know, what part is our part? What part is the part that the board's doing? What part is, you know, what parts of the village are using that legal portion, so I can actually make a kind of a decision from reality. So that's it.
Okay. Any other comments, Trustee Burson?
Just one on the roads. I appreciate Treasurer McPhillips, urging that we look closely at the elephant in the room. It's not just an elephant, it's like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. It's true. But to Trustee Williams' point and to Trustee McElvey's point, we are tasked with passing a budget in the next week or two. And so this is a capital expenditure that is not part of our budget for next year solving this problem. This problem has to get solved, but there is nothing about our budget next year that solves this problem. And so we have a lot of work to do to try and figure out how to solve this problem, because we have a variety of different capitalization options, and they're all kind of crummy, and nobody's going to like any of them. But, you know, we are going to have to do the hard work of taking those up and figuring out what can be done.
Okay.
The,
I guess, before you go, I
Oh.
would suggest the 22nd, we'll open a public hearing. We
Yes, we'll probably hold
won't
it open.
We won't probably complete it, and we'll leave it open to
29th.
the 28th or 29th if we get a direction from the board, maybe on which night is better.
Well, it's the fifth Monday and the fifth Tuesday, so if we need to extend
If,
next. Right, we probably won't finish next Tuesday. If we do it, fine.
but if
But-
you don't, we should have a date in
Yeah.
mind to continue too. The Monday or Tuesday, that 28 or 29, if you could just, you don't have to
Let us know if
commit
you're
tonight.
unavailable, let us
but
know,
if-
let us know if you're gonna be out of town or unavailable, that'd be good.
So if you'd
Well, you were
CC
gonna-
the clerk and
You were gonna be out of
myself.
town. Oh, next week you're out of town, okay, fine, okay, all right.
The
That's-
Tuesday's the general night that we meet, so that's the easiest to pick.
Usually there's no other conflict unless.
So unless somebody's got a real problem with the 29th, and we don't hear from, we'll just plan on that.
Okay.
And if we get done next Tuesday, that's great, but if we don't, we've got the runway to still,
And that still gets us done by the 30th.
yes.
Okay. Go.
And my schedule changed for next week, so I'm here.
You were, okay, that's good to know.
So I can, and that week after should be
Okay.
fine, so.
Oh, yeah, we're doing 5:30 next Tuesday, and there may be food, I think. Didn't I say that last time? There may be food? 5:30 next week. I want to reiterate one more time. We started half police, but police was half of our revenue when we started, and we're still close to that. So if our trend line is bad on that, then to your point, trustee Williams, it's more concerning. Not that it's not concerning, but I think it's more concerning for a trend line, and it's starting to peel away just a little. Right now, in my mind, we're 100,000 different, or 200,000 if we want to cover both sides of that delta. The road issue, I'll say again too, the road issue is important, it is substantive. We are in no way, shape, or form alone in that bucket. Everybody, every municipality, township, county, state, feds are in the same budget, or same predicament. So we can get creative on how we want to deal with it. We can get creative on how we present it, all that kind of stuff. But we have in the past, it does become a little bit germane to the operating discussion in my mind, because we have in the past done transfers. We've been in comfortable positions in the past to say, okay, we're going to take $500,000 out of operating transfer to capital. So this does potentially impinge upon that if we're looking at that becoming less of an opportunity, because that would then affect the capital side of things more.
Yeah, and when we get to capital, we're going to show that we're projecting to put 600,000 of your cash unobligated fund balance toward the 4 roads that are scheduled.
Right, we talked about that, yeah.
So you know that that 600,000, you've already committed to doing that. We just have to do it in the budget.
Then then our reserve debt fund for, and then our reserve policy should be approximately 3 million.
Yeah.
I think if I remember right, so, let's see. Hey, trustees-elect, how are you doing out there? Welcome. No, I'm serious. Actually, that's what I'm gonna do right now, since you guys are gonna be getting into this. You got any comments or questions you'd like to address at this point? I'll open it up for you.
Or requests of
Or requests.
specific information, so we have it for the 22nd.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, Frank, would you grab the mic just to, because so it can get picked up?
So the actual police budget's probably going to come in over 2 million this
Looking.
year. Because you got 10 months at
Yeah.
1.6, you're averaging about 170,000 a month, so you're going to be over 2 million, so your increase in the budget's about 200,000.
That's the other way to look at it, yeah.
Okay. The other thing is, there's a lot of inconsistencies, because what's being budgeted, some of it's against what was budgeted the year before, some of it is against what's actual spends. So if you're doing a budget, it's got to be consistent. You know, there's got to be explanations as, we spent $40,000 more on this line item this year, why did we spend $40,000 more? Then you can't go back and budget 40,000 less, right, unless you got a good reason for it.
Right.
Because you have to assume if it's 40,000 more, you're going to have 40,000 more. So there's a lot of inconsistency in this budget, and I think it needs to be addressed.
Okay, if you guys think if you get some ahead of time, you want to send them to, through Mark, we can get those, or if you just want to bring them next week, that'd be fine too. Therese, Kim, any?
I was just gonna say, I'm just looking at this.
You got it, I'm sorry. It's just, yes, there you go, get used to it.
We have a public, Therese.
It's a whole lot of nothing here. I was just saying that this is the first time I'm seeing this, and so, yeah, we'll digest it over the next couple of days, and by next week, or we'll either bring things here, or I'll send them to
Send
Mr.
them.
Rooney.
You can send them straight to Tim, too. We'll, Tim
Just
and.
Sure.
copy, at least both. You should have,
Copy
yeah.
us both.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's it.
Cool, Kim, anything?
No, I've been in finance committees.
That's true, Kim's on finance, so she's already suffered. Tim, anything else we should be focused on?
No, I just want to be clear that there's concern on this graph that this red line is deviating substantially from the revenue.
Yes.
That's correct? That's a big concern of the board's?
Yep.
Okay. And it's also a concern of the board that we're very happy with the police. We want to keep them fully funded.
Agreed? Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll work on closing that red line and keeping the police budget operational.
Okay.
I think one of the takeaways that we intended with this chart is really just to alert you that the local distributive fund, that the village revenues relied on primarily, because the police fines and building permits, until we changed it with Norton Lake, the last 30 permits, where we took 3,000 and went to 10. That's when you got some money. Other than that, it was breaking kind of cost of doing business, revenue to pay most of it, not all of it, because it still cost out of your local distributive fund to have a building department.
yeah, I
It
mean,
wasn't self, it
Building's
wasn't
never
self-sustaining.
correct, it's never, because code enforcement
Yeah.
and some of that stuff is, I get that, right?
Right,
But-
so it's
So what's
never
what's our baseline, what we think for our size, what would be a good baseline without a new subdivision, what would be a good baseline? That's the number we should probably look at, say.
Right.
Here's
But
what we
in-
really
to-
think we should have for our
To
basic zoning
trustee
functions.
Williams's point, LGDF has been increasing at about 3.2, 3.3 over
Yes.
the last nine
Under inflation, yeah.
9 years.
Yeah.
But our costs have went from that CPI of 2.5,
Yeah,
3.
yeah, the delta's there.
To more like 7 and going up to
Mhm.
even greater next year. And that is, you can like it or not like it,
Yes.
but that's the fiscal reality. You no longer, as trustee Williams said, I don't think it was folly, it worked for 17 years. But the predicate that local distributive fund is going to be enough to run this village going forward is the point of this graph. It is not going to be sustainable because you've only got so much general fund unobligated dollars to transfer. At some point.
It could be all, it'll be all police at some point.
Yeah, at some point.
Trustee
But
Williams?
you're still on your line of
Yeah.
2 million and you bring in 4.8.
Oh,
So
we
you're-
could run a decent police department for 4.2 million. Don't
So-
let the chief hear that. Go.
So the next meeting's on Tuesday, right?
Yeah.
When can we see some of this stuff earlier if we have some, if you're going to change some things that you said?
I'm going to change very little. I'm a part-time person here.
No, I know you. I just want to get it as early as possible so we can analyze it. You know, 'cause I think we got this one at what time?
I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the schedule that I gave you last
Okay.
month.
Could you do that again?
And I'm going to give it to you, the one that
Okay.
I provided the
Yeah.
previous year. It sounds like the board wants to focus on previous budget to this budget.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's pretty normal, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
but.
Well,
yeah.
actually, you're right. Okay, go ahead.
No, that's the only way I can look at it. I mean, I have to compare it to something, kind of like, what our budget was, how we finished, and
Right. Well,
where we're going to, okay, you know what I mean?
Right.
So, yeah.
Therese, did you want something else?
Just real quick.
Got it, sorry.
Can you give us access to the charts? I don't have those, the ones that you've been referring to, the graphs and the
Yeah,
charts.
we can give it to
and
If the board is accommodating to that, I'll start including the
Everybody
three-
fine with that?
three
Yes.
Is that
elected.
all right?
I'll get you a hard copy right after the meeting.
And then
Okay.
to trustee Burson's point, can we get just a spreadsheet, the Excel file? Not yours, obviously, just say it as play around file or something.
Yeah, I don't
Okay.
think that's a problem.
Jim first, then, go.
Yeah.
So that's it. Any other info that we need?
Yeah, Tim, the only other question I would have, and I asked you this before the meeting, which was a little, I just kind of threw it at you. I'm a little concerned about the 10-month and what happened. So we're missing March and April, right?
Correct.
But you must forecast that. You must have a good feeling what that number is, right? Based on run rate, et cetera. You should, usually what happens at the end of the year, they'll say, then the forecast, and the beanies will go down, and they'll get pretty close. Because my concern is some of the March warrants that we approved were extremely high. So when I look at, maybe we're going to end up worse than we think we are if that forecast is off. So I'm just would love to see a final year forecast from you based on what we know from March and April, but because you got run rate, you got some actual warrants in, March is done, you should be able to take a sneak at the warrants, because I just have this funny feeling that's going to come in uglier than we think they are. That's my only request.
Trustee Burson?
So I have a comment about the budget process generally, and our very hardworking treasurer is unfortunately standing here all alone, taking the brunt of all this, and it's not intended, that way. This is, in fact, my comment doesn't bear on your work at all. It's what we are doing as a board, and I think we are missing an opportunity ourselves. A budget, to me, is not an exercise in counting beans at the 11th hour. A budget is an aspirational document that expresses what we as a municipality want to accomplish over the next year. And I don't know, I don't think when we set policy, I don't think we're doing it, again, like at the 11th hour. We do it throughout the year. But our budget, we somehow manage, like most people, when it comes to dealing with numbers like this, we push it off until the very end. And I think one of the things we could do for ourselves as a board is to engage in this budget process much earlier in the year. I don't see, at the very least, one of the things we could do for ourselves is to have a semi-annual process in which we sit down and start to think about not only how does it look this year, but what is it that we are planning for the next year? What is it that we are not planning? And start to look at some of those decisions and the dollars and cents associated with them well in advance, so that we can inform our treasurer of what our hopes and dreams are in July or in September or something, instead of having this pressure cooker situation 2 weeks before we're about to pass the budget. I apologize that you're in that situation.
Trustee Benetti, or elect Benetti?
My suggestion would be to not compare budget over budget, because a budget is just kind of an estimate. I think you do need to look at actuals, and you need to look at trends when you're creating the next budget. So I agree with Tim. I think you have to do that because, a budget to me is a roadmap as to what you want to accomplish, to Trustee Burson's point. And then it's how you get there, right? And it's what you want to spend on and how you're going to generate revenue and whatnot. It should be a game plan of what you want to do. But to ignore the actuals because you want to compare the budget to budget, I think is dangerous. So.
Okay, good point.
And I think that's what Trustee McKelvey was saying. Let's get the actual for this finishing budget year and compare that to the proposed.
Okay, got that, Tim? We're going to do it that way.
Yep.
Okay, we just changed what you said. So, projected to budget. Projected actual to budget.
That is the way I would do it.
Okay,
yes.
projected actual to budget. We're all head nod, head down, head down.
And I would just like to make a comment on
Go.
Trustee Burson's most recent comment. I do think the budget process here is extremely dysfunctional. And I've been here 2 years. The Finance Committee is great, but before I presented to you, I had to present to the Finance Committee. And then I had to get the audit before I can give them the budget. And it's very time constrained with a very limited staff. Trustee McKelvey brings up a very good point. You much rather want to start with what the estimate is for the remainder of the year and possibly budget from there. We are way too small to ever consider a zero-based budget. I mean, it's just not going to happen. But I think that is a perfect starting point, is the estimate for the current fiscal year.
Okay, so get
Alright.
some flyouts from your folks to confirm, and then you'll look at your burn rate and see where we're at. Okay. That should be the end for item 8. Everybody good with that? Good discussion? Thanks, everybody. Seems like we had a good back and forth. Got some marching orders for staff. We usually have good of the order type stuff, so I'm going to put it in there anyway, because
Yeah,
you
I'd-
guys let me
I'd-
have the gavel for tonight,
I'd like
so.
to go first on that. We've
Okay.
got the comp plan is coming to a conclusion. They are having a meeting on the 30th of this month at 7 PM, and there'll be a total roll-up of all the changes that were proposed and agreed to ensure there's agreement on those. And then they're going to project to have a 15 May workshop at 5:30, followed by the public hearing after they kind of do a workshop, so people have more of an opportunity to see the exhibits, talk about them, and then generate their, if they might have further questions at said public hearing. So you could legitimately expect the second meeting of May to have a recommended new comp plan before the village board.
Wow. Well, okay. Something, Trustee Burson?
I think that's awesome, but it also brings up a concern to me because I'm looking at 3 new trustees that are going to have barely gotten their feet wet in the role before considering a major strategic document. And so I'm open to having as much discussion about it as we want, but I think they should, be given an ample amount of time to ramp up into that.
Roger that.
Yeah, Mike,
Trustee McCauley?
I agree with trustee Burson. In fact, I would say that let the new board be the ones to see it first, get their arms around it, and pass it.
Yeah, and that
Makes sense.
schedule, absolutely they will. They will, if they go to the 30th meeting, they'll hear a discussion, they'll have the workshop on the 15th and the public hearing, and then it'll come before the board and it'll have however many meetings to discuss that comp plan as the new 7
Okay.
that are seated May 6th decide to have.
Okay,
I'm not saying you got to do it in one meeting.
okay. Good clarification. Anything
You
else?
You decide when you're done.
Anything else? Anything else? Anything else? All right, then we are on to adjournment. Do I have a motion? I'll go for Williams.
Second.
Do I have a second? Second from Burson. No discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, you can